truly merciful Heavenly Father, how can we praise your name and glorify your name? We know we are but the dust of the earth. From it came, into it we shall return. And we know if it were not for thy great love, thy mercy, thy grace, the veracity of thy word, we would perish, and the great power that you have would scatter our dust to the four corners of the earth, and we'd never be heard from again. But because we trust you and love you and know your word to be true, we long for that day when thy Son shall return and establish thy kingdom here upon the face of this earth. We pray for that day when we may transform from this worthless dust, spirit and light, to bring honor and glory and praise to your name, and to obey you with the slightest inclination. Always glad to do so and thinking it the normal, natural thing to do. We long for that because we struggle with that so much in our lives today. We thank thee that you brought us together here this night to hear thy word of instruction. May we be guided and directed by it and changed by it. We pray you be with those who aren't as blessed to be with us tonight, that you be with them to guide and direct them. And may these words bring honor and glory to your name. We thank thee for all these things in through the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for being here. And tonight we're going to be, we looked last week at we looked last week at Eve and Sarah and the influence they had on history, changing it. And this week we're going to look at chapter 5, which is women's influence stronger than man's strength or intellect. And we're just looking at it from the biblical perspective. I'm not coming up with anything earth-shattering. So we're going to be looking at how historically empowered man's influence and physical strength have been thwarted by two different scenarios. One is the wives of Solomon, who brought down a dynasty, and Delilah, who definitely was not the weaker vessel. And then a conclusion on what we can look at with its influence. So we'll get started. So in this particular instance, I've got so many things covering the slides I can barely see. Why is all this? There we go. So when we're talking about this, I want us to compare and contrast these two passages and kind of think about it. One is from 1 Peter chapter 3, and the other one's from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. So in the left-hand margin, it says, husband and wives, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you in the gracious gift of life, that nothing can do your prayers. So probably no other words of Paul brought more controversy than this one phrase, because we don't really, in that instance, a lot of people question, what does that word mean? And I put it in the definition down below. And then there's the one on the right-hand side from Corinthians, says, brothers, think what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us the wisdom of God, that is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. So when you put these two passages together, what might be some of your conclusions? It's speaking about a similar thing in both passages. Let me ask you this. Who was it who first witnessed that Christ had been resurrected? The most important news of all of history was given to whom?
Mary Magdalene.
Yep, the women.
Women, right.
They came to the tomb and they learned the most significant news since the creation, that Christ had been risen from the dead. Not in a mortal form, but he was eventually going to be immortal. So it's pretty incredible when we consider these things. And so in many cases, what was considered the weaker partner was glorified by Christ in many different respects. They were the first ones to hear the news. They were the ones that supported his ministry. And we're going to see that they also administered to Paul's as well. So I think these two correlate, because it still tells the husbands to live considerately with your wives and have respect for the weaker partner. But in what way are they weaker? They're supposed to be supportive, but at the same time, they're going to be glorified just like a husband would. Christ is the husband of the church and be glorified it. So anyway, it's just something to really think about, that we've been taken from a state of weakness, from a state of foolishness or despised, and made transformed into something completely different. Yes, Walter.
So we see what Christ has done here through the plan God made.
Yep.
In the beginning, the curse was put upon the land, but God made a promise to the woman: through you, your seed, would the salvation come.
Right.
So although she was involved in the downfall of the human race, in the end, it would be her son, her seed, that would bring salvation. And so you see it echoed here, that in her weakness, she's really becoming stronger.
Yeah.
Because through her will be the salvation. Every wife, every married woman of Israel prayed that she was the one to whom Messiah would come through.
Absolutely.
And so there you go. It gave them a great faith and a reason to look forward to. God may visit me.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful way. And you see that reflected in Hannah's prayer as well as Mary's. And Hannah's son certainly led Israel all the way to the time of the kings. And so the word there is asthenes, which means weak, infirm, or feeble. So we learn about this from First Chronicles chapter 1, and then First Kings chapter 11, starting in verse 1. So I can get a reader for this slide.
Okay, we're going to start with Dan tonight.
All right. Woman's influence stronger than man's strength or intellect. Solomon, the wisest man. Reading from 2 Chronicles 1:11. God said to Solomon, "Since this is your heart's desire, and you have not asked for wealth, riches, or honor, nor the death of your enemies, and since you have not asked for a long life, but for wisdom and knowledge to govern my people, over whom I have made you king, therefore wisdom and knowledge will be given to you. And I will also give you wealth, riches, and honor, such as no king who is before you ever had, and none of after you will have." King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonites, and Hittites. They are from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, but his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Malek, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Shemash, the detestable god of Moab, and Melech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods.
So the first passage is there. Thank you so much, Dan, for reading that. The first passage about him, Dan.
He started off on the right mindset. He was asking, he's very humble. He didn't ask for like to be built up, to be very wealthy. He had the right intentions in mind. He needed a wisdom-filled mind to lead the nation as he should have. And we see in the second part how he was led astray by his wife's. Exactly how God said that he would be if they intermarried.
Right, right. With the
Like
Abigail.
verbatim almost.
Exactly. So he was told very carefully, and he was made the wisest man who existed on earth, which is so interesting. He's like, he has all this wisdom, then how did he fall for this? But you can see kind of a chain reaction that once you would marry one wife and you build her a palace and a temple for her gods, what's gonna happen to wife number 2, Dan?
She's gonna want it. And then the third one's gonna want it, and the fourth.
Exactly. So you're gonna wind up writing blank checks to everybody down the line. So you could see how this just is a never-ending process. Like the wives of these different nations, don't you love me as you do that Egyptian princess? Why don't you build me a palace? Why don't you build me a temple? And so they're just gonna continue to do this. And it brought him down. So right in chapter 11, it's his foreign wives that destroy the empire and bring it down to nothing. And you see that happen when Rehoboam becomes king right after him. So this is the first piece of the proof, which is that Solomon's great wisdom was destroyed by foreign women and their influence. Can I get a reader for this slide?
Easy.
Wisdom versus the adulteress. Proverbs 2:16. Wisdom will save you also from the adulteress, from the wayward wife with her seductive words, who has left the partner of her youth and ignored the covenant she made before God. For her house leads down to death, and her paths to the spirits of the dead. None who go to her return or attain the paths of life.
So who wrote this?
Proverbs.
Solomon.
Solomon wrote this. And I think it's really interesting because it's an acknowledgement of what these foreign wives with their selected words can do. They can bring them down to the point of death. So it's just, to me, super interesting to see that. Yes, sir.
So you got to note, you can have so much wisdom, be the smartest guy or gal around. But if you can't discern
Yeah.
the right, the wrong, and how you should live, doesn't matter if I know all things as was
Well, he was supposed to be given discernment. That's why he had that big
Yes.
piece right afterwards.
exactly. And so, like I was saying, if you do not apply the discernment between right, wrong, and what should be done, and only just smart guy, I know 2 + 2 is 4, but do I know when to use it right? And that's what Solomon's problem was. As he got older, he had too much influence from others, and that made it hard for him
Yeah.
to the kingdom of discernment.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's just amazing because we have a hard time seeing this. So this is also written by Solomon, which I think is just interesting that he includes these things in here. And it causes the fall of his own empire. So go ahead and read this.
Proverbs 5. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen well to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion and your lips may preserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the ways of life. Her paths are crooked, but she knows it not. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your best strength to others and your years to one who is cruel. Let strangers feast on your well and your toil enrich another man's house. At the end of your life, you will groan when your flesh and body are spent. You will say, how I hated discipline. I would not obey my teachers or listen to my instructors. I have come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly. Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares. Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May you ever be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. The evil deeds of the wicked man ensnares him. The cords of his sin hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline, led astray by his own great folly.
So it's fascinating to me that he wrote all these words. Great advice, very well thought out, very well laid out. And he's telling young men, don't let your water run in the streets, meaning that don't let your morality be exposed all over the place, or immorality. You drink water from your own well, not from all the wells. And he's using water as a metaphor for women. And that they can be life sustaining. That's why this whole proverb that this whole thing comes from, either a crown on the head or rottenness to the bones. He knew it well because he had 300 wives of noble birth and 700 concubines. So I think he's a subject matter expert on this, but unfortunately it still let him down. So anybody else have any comments on Proverbs 5? Everybody's quiet tonight.
There's a lot there that's being glossed over unless you're paying attention to it. Because he's really talking about women and other things when he's talking about these streams and all these wells. I mean, anyone's married gets the idea. I know what he's talking about,
Yeah.
Stay with your own wife and not go off to these strange places. Because you know how it can be. The other wells might be polluted.
Yes, exactly. They certainly can be. So there's a lot to think about here with that. So now we're going to talk about the second woman in this scenario. So Samson was undoubtedly the strongest man who ever lived. By birth, he wasn't allowed certain things: to cut his hair, to eat grapes or drink wine. He had to stay away from all of it. And he was a judge of Israel for 40 years. Pretty hard to judge Israel, just like Solomon was also a judge. When your intellect is led astray by the women in your life. But this one's good for someone who has.
Yes.
Yes.
Brother David, Sister Nancy, I think this is the right size for you guys.
All
Whoever would
right,
like
we'll try. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued."
Subdued. Yeah, so this passage is always fascinating to me because her motivation for trying to bring down Samson is what?
money, ill-gotten gain.
Yeah.
Money.
Money. So that's what she's interested in, and she's willing to sell out her big man for, silver. And what's surprising to me is her remark is just unshellacked. It doesn't show any skill or dexterity at all. It's not like she's being subtle or being the slightest bit diplomatic. She's like, "Tell me the secret of how I can tie you up and beat you." And I'm like, what? I'm like,
Go away.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm amazed he doesn't have any insight on this. Go ahead. Somebody was gonna say something?
Well, I think, see in the picture, it was in his hair.
Oh,
So she-
okay.
So she cut his hair.
Yeah,
Right.
well, we're coming to that, but it's just amazing that he didn't have any discernment about this at all. I mean, if I heard this remark from a girlfriend, she'd be gone. So, to me, it's just amazing that she doesn't even try to be tactful or slick about this at all. So, here we go, this is our next passage.
Yeah,
I'll
David,
read,
is that,
I'll read this one.
Okay.
Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the third time you have made a fool out of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day after day until he was tired to death. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazarite, set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more, he has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with silver in their hands, having put him to sleep on her lap. She called a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him.
So it's a very tragic passage because you're constantly thinking, why doesn't he escape from this trap? This isn't the first time she's tried to do this. It's the 4th time she's tried to do it. First, she asked it straight out. Then he told her what? What was the first one?
is it
Fire with
Ropes?
Is it new
cords.
Yeah.
Ropes.
Yeah, with new cord.
the new cord? Yeah.
And then it was bow straps, and then it was braiding his hair, and finally shaving his head. So this is time number 4 that he's gone through all this rigmarole with her. And it's like, do you not see? Have you no clue? The signs are everywhere of what's going on here. He even thinks when he wakes up, oh, I'm gonna do the same as I did before. And I'm like, is this a game to you? Because she's got you, and it's really bad.
And the wording she uses. This is the third time you've made a fool out of me.
Yeah,
Well, why are you being made a fool out of? Like, who you made a fool in front of?
exactly.
Obviously, it's Philistines you want to look in front of.
Mhm.
I know. And she, I mean, she's not a great communicator. She sends a note to all the leaders of the people who offered her money. It's like, come back. He told me everything. I'm like, a child could have written this on a scrap of paper. And she's obviously getting what she wants from him, and then gonna trade him in after all this is over with. And shaved his 7 braids of hair, and it just is mystifying how this all falls apart. And after this, he is blinded, his eyes are popped out, and he is used to grind grain at a mill. And he has to basically walk around in a circle continuously. There's no destination for him. He's just a mule, basically. So let's look at some of these translations for Judges 16:16. It's a great password if you want to use it. NIV says, with such nagging, she prodded him day after day till he was tired to death. King James, and it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him that his soul was vexed unto death. And I like that term, pressed him with her words. So where does he go after this? He is grinding grain. pressing a rock against another rock to grind something to death. And that's exactly what happened to him. It was a future forecasting of what was going to happen. So I'll just read the last one, Proverbs 27:15. A quarrelsome wife is like a constant dripping on a rainy day. Restraining her is like restraining the wind or grasping oil with your hands. It can't be done, in other words, to finish the thought. So any other versions that pop out of here on the slide for you or from your own versions? Anyone?
That's good sense.
HBSC says because she nagged him daily, day after day, and pled with him until she wore him out.
Yeah.
Okay. So I hope we've established her methodology and what she used. And she's like, how can you say you love me if you don't? These are the same tactics used over and over again. So let's put it all together. In the chapter before, you have the such nagging she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death. Yet King Samson killed 1,000 Philistine warriors with the jawbone of an ass. He was not tired. He was thirsty, but not tired. Yet Delilah was the one who wore him down to the point of death. That's why I've got them in scales here. You got 1,000 Philistine warriors versus Delilah. Which was the weightier of the two? Dan, you tell me.
I wonder.
You went there?
Delilah.
Yep. I mean, who was the most famous Philistine warrior that we know of?
Goliath.
Yeah. So can you imagine his kith and kin and cousins all in this fight? 1,000 of them that Samson slew, not with a sword, not with a slingshot, but with a jawbone of an ass. So I'm like, oh my goodness, that just blows my mind every time I think about it.
Great.
So this should be earth-shattering to all of us because the Bible gives us the most intelligent man that ever lived, the strongest man that ever lived. And it tells us their demise on both fronts, intellect and physicality, that they were completely undercut and thrown over by the wrong sort of women and their influence. Okay? Does anybody disagree with that statement? Okay.
Yeah.
So can I get a reader for this slide?
All right, David, I think you can read this one if you like.
Thank you. Matthew 18:5-6. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone cause one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea.
I looked for an example of this and I found one. So this is a millstone from a shipwreck in 1840, and it's in Averøy, Norway. I'm like, that's some cold water that man is in. So this is what Christ is talking about. It would be better to be, have this tied around your neck and thrown into the ocean than to mislead anybody. So what do you think is going to happen to Solomon's wives and to Delilah?
Don't we ever hear from them ever again?
No, because they're in the bottom of the sea tied to a millstone.
Yeah, they're gone.
But everyone could use their influence for good or for evil. And they certainly have, and I think this is just a great conclusion of the matter, pulling it all together from these two. And how it took place. So we're on to, which is two roads of influence. And we're going to talk about Michal. It changed the spelling of it when I did the spell check. It's Michal, the wife of David,
Right.
and Abigail. And I want us to compare and contrast these two women. Michal, who sees with her father's eyes only to rise and criticize, and Abigail, who stooped to conquer.
Mhm.
And how you can use your influence is totally up to you. But you can use it for good or for evil, and they compare and contrast very strongly. So we're gonna start off with Michal, the despiser, and she definitely was the product of her father in the way he thought about things. So let's get a reader for 2 Samuel chapter 6.
Betsy, it's your turn if you're able. Let's see if you can hear.
I can hear. I just had trouble with my mic opening.
Okay. There
I
we
had
go.
to go out and come back in before it wouldn't open.
There you go.
Michal, seeing with her father's eyes. 2 Samuel, starting at verse 23. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fatted calf. David, wearing a linen ephod, danced before the Lord with all his might, while he and the entire house of Israel brought the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, disrobing in the sight of the slave girls of his servants and as any vulgar fellow would do." David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me to rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death.
Oops.
This chapter is a zinger. It's like a crack of lightning. And you should look at this and go, oh my goodness, there is so much out of this passage. So what happened the first time David tried to bring the ark of the Lord to Jerusalem?
Mm,
What happened the first time?
What's his name? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Touched it.
Yeah.
Uzzah got
That's
killed.
what I'm trying to remember.
So he brought it on a cart. He didn't bring it by the Levites were supposed to carry it on the poles.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Know that, including the guy who got killed, Uzzah, and it was put on an ox, and the ox stumbled, and the ark almost went over, so he tried to steady it with his hand, and when he did, he was struck down.
Oh, yeah.
So then it was taken to a specific household for months, and that person's household was completely blessed. So finally, it's being brought to Jerusalem, and David is ecstatic about it. And he cleans the house of Judah, cleans the house of the Levites as well, and says, "You all should have known this. Get your act in order, be cleansed, carry it the right way." And there's no edict at all from the law that you have to sing and dance before the Lord when you're moving the ark. We don't have any record of that happening except for Miriam dancing when they got across to the other side of the Jordan, but the ark wasn't built yet. So he's dancing with all his might. His wife, Michal, is where in the story?
She
Watching from window.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's watching from a window. Is she supporting her husband? Is she with him?
Huh.
Is she excited?
She's
about
judging
this?
him.
Yes, she's judging him. And what does the word here say that she thought when she saw him dancing before the Lord?
Where was it?
She
Despised
despised him in her heart. Despised, like you despicable man. I mean, like all of the things that Saul did that were completely, really despicable.
Yeah.
You don't have any record of her despising those things. But I want you to see that the carnal mind despises the spiritual, despises any showing, any case of someone being exuberant, excited, thrilled about the Lord. We look at these people sometimes and say, well, they're shaming themselves. Well, they're acting foolishly. Well, they're overreacting. They're being too joyful. They're being too exuberant. They should sober up, and just sit and quietly listen. That's not what David was doing here. He was leaping and dancing before the Lord. So, and I want you to notice something else. So she's despising him in her heart. David is coming home to do what? It says in the very next thing, in the middle of the paragraph. David went home to do what to his household?
Bless
To
it.
bring the blessing on it.
To bring a blessing. And when she comes out to greet him, she's bringing a
Curse.
curse. He's coming home to bless. She's coming out to curse. And then she is very sarcastic, very sardonic. How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, just robing in the sight of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would. What's the problem with this? Did only slave girls exist in all of Israel? Were they the only ones who bore witness to bringing the Ark of Jerusalem? Or was everybody there?
Right.
So she's cherry picking what she wants out of a whole society and saying, you did this before them. Right?
Yeah. And her words are spoken against the anointed of the Lord.
Yep.
That usually doesn't go well.
Nope. And she's acting like he's being lewd, like he's being wrong and humiliating himself, not acting like he was distinguished. And to me, it's just an incredible thing to think about. So David doesn't miss a trick. It is right. I mean, he is so sharp-witted, it just comes right to him immediately. And he says, it was before the Lord, not you, not these slave girls, none of you. I was dancing for God. Now, we as Christadelphians don't talk about dancing much. It's not like we ever engage in it or even think about it. But he's saying, I was dancing for the Lord in this passage. Who appointed me rather than your father or anyone from his household to be ruler over Israel. So he despises in this sentence the whole household of Saul's descendants.
Mhm.
And eventually it would be David, the Gibeonites, that he would offer up 5 more of Saul's sons to be killed by the Gibeonites. They were hung, and Rizpah, Saul's girlfriend, was the one who defended the bodies while they were hanging from the buzzards.
Right.
So it's going to turn on Michal now. And he basically says, I was celebrating all of this before the Lord. And he says, I will become even more undignified than this. I will be humiliated in my own eyes. And he then addresses the audience that she cherry picked out of thousands. There were judges there. There were farmers there. There were masons there. There was every sector of society. Blacksmiths, probably rulers, probably accountants, and many, many more who were all participating in this. But because she specifically selected this one group, you think there was nothing but slave girls in all of Israel, the way she put it. He says, by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. You despise me, they're gonna honor me. You despise me, they're gonna honor me. So it makes a specific point here at the end. Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. In other words, no descendants at all. Now, let's not forget her history. She's married to David, but later on, David becomes the king, and she has been married off to somebody else, right? And David, when he becomes king, says to the house of Benjamin, he says, if you want me to be king, then you have to bring me Michal.
Yeah, give me my wife.
Give me my wife back. Don't know why he wanted her back, but he asked for her back. We never hear about her again after that. We just know that she had no children to the day of her death. And her second husband, when they were separated from each other, literally is publicly crying and weeping and
Sure.
gnashing his teeth over the loss of her. So obviously she was, a pretty amazing woman, and she did do some good things in her life. She prevented Saul from killing her husband by letting him down through the window and putting an idol in his bed and covering it with goat's hair, making it look like David. So pretty incredible stuff. But this is the end of the road for Michal because of how she used her influence. She wanted to demean her husband, she wanted to belittle him and make him feel small for serving God.
Mhm.
And we're going to contrast that very effectively with Abigail, yes.
And the last thing to keep in mind, by these actions, all hope of any bloodline of Saul is
Yeah.
terminated.
Yeah.
See, the subtle thing, because there was only one individual in the entire family of Saul who was of any value at all, and that was Jonathan.
Yeah,
The rest of them,
I know.
it's like her.
Yeah, they had a lot of pride.
They did.
A lot of pride, and that pretty much worked it. Okay.
Ooh, cool.
May we get a reader for this slide?
Okay, we are back to Dan the Man.
The different translations of 2 Samuel 6:16.
Now, let's remember, the other passage was Judges 16:16. These two women are linked together by 16.
CEV. Saul's daughters, Michal. Saul's daughter Michal looked out her window and watched the chests being brought into David's city. But when she saw David jumping and dancing for the Lord, she was disgusted. ASV. And it was so, as the ark of Jehovah came into the city of David, that Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out at the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before Jehovah, and she despised him in her heart. The ark, NIRV. The ark of the Lord was brought into the city of David. Saul's daughter Michal was watching from a window. She saw King David leaping and dancing. That made her hate him in her heart.
So,
Baza,
go ahead.
to despise. To despise, holding contempt or disdain. Paul, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, it's just that these are the parts of speech. It's always fall, hifal, and
Oh, okay.
so these are how it's used in Hebrew.
Gotcha.
Like past tense, present tense, future tense, but it's all in this case. I think it's the context of how it's used. It's not time. Go ahead.
Gotcha. So Paul is used to despise, regard with contempt. Used in the fall. Is to be despised, to be despicable, to be vile or worthless. And hifal is to cause to despise.
Yeah. So thank you, Will. Thank you for reading that. So here we have a lot that it's telling us that she basically hated him in her heart and that she was disgusted. Yes, Walter.
And so she misses out and the others miss out when he's saying, I'm dancing before the Lord. What does he mean? Well, he is carrying the Ark of the Covenant into the city, which by extension is God returning to the city.
Yeah.
You see. So he is literally dancing before the Ark, before the Lord God of Israel returning to the home, if you will.
Yeah.
And she despises him.
Yeah.
So she's doing this before the Lord when she does these things. So I just thought it's kind of subtle, but it's kind of important to think about this. No wonder she has no children from then on.
Yeah. So I want you to think about this. Some of us, when Christ returns, are going to be dancing and leaping before the Lord over the joy of him coming back, of his return. And others will be despising the return of the Lord, and they will not be as thrilled or happy about it. So that's a big point to me, is that some of us will be joyful over the Lord's return, and other people will be despising the joy of others when Christ returns. Is there a problem, guys?
No, we're figuring something out.
Okay. All right. So these are some translations of the rebuke. And I'm just gonna read the second part. Uncovering himself in the eyes of the handsmaid of his servants, as any vain fellow shamelessly uncovers himself. So she's accusing him of basically dancing naked before the Lord, which he was not. He was wearing a linen ephod from top to bottom. He wasn't wearing his royal robes. That's what's not here. So when you read Leviticus, it tells you exactly what the Levites wore when they were wearing their linen ephods.
So we were trying to figure out the lineage of someone else who later came in the line of Saul, who actually was kind of a cool person.
Who's that?
And we figured out that Mordecai is a descendant of Kish, a Benjamite, who was also the father of King Saul, which also leads us to Esther.
Wow, that's awesome.
Oh.
Yeah, Joanne said that wasn't Esther related to King Saul. And yeah,
There are descendants of Saul, just
Yeah.
not for Michael.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Esther is Mordecai's adopted daughter and cousin. Okay. All right, yeah, that's okay. West
Yeah.
Virginia stories here.
Yeah, I never drew that connection.
Me either,
Saul to
and I'm glad
Mordecai.
Joanne asked the question, because then I got to
Yeah.
think, wait a minute, there's something here.
Yeah.
Anyway, we want to pass that on to you.
Definitely. So, it's very incredible that she picks this out, and she says, you know, shamelessly uncovering herself and dancing before the slave girl. So we're gonna contrast this with Abigail, who stoops to conquer. This is really powerful because this time David, is he coming to bless the household of Nabal?
Oh, no.
He's coming with a curse. Does she come out with a curse or a blessing?
Blessing and some good wisdom.
Yeah, so right from the start, there's two very different things happening. In the other story, David is bringing the ark of the Lord back. In this case, he was gonna rain down death on the house of Nabal. He comes to curse, she comes out to bless. And we see the exact inverse of that with the story of Michael. Both women wind up marrying the same men. So tell me, in a science experiment, what does it mean to isolate your variables? In a science experiment, what does it mean to isolate your variables? In order to conduct this experiment and try the same scenario in different cases, what do you gotta do?
Each thing that can change in the thing that you're testing, you identify, whether it's 5, 10, 20. And you take each one of those things and make it so that you can independently test each one of them, so that you can repeat them. Those are your variables. And you want to see if I vary this one this way, what the result is if I hold the other steady, for example, and so forth and so on.
Exactly, so it's part of the scientific method.
Yep.
So here we have the same man being tested by two different women to see what the outcome is gonna be. I bet it gets hot tea, because it's really getting itchy, get someone easy. First Samuel 25 for me.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read for you.
One of the servants told Nabal's wife, Abigail, David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us all the time. We were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seers of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him."
Pretty incredible stuff, isn't it?
Yeah,
It is.
we had to fire. He's good.
Anyway, so what is so incredible about the story is that he's coming there to destroy her household, and it's a servant who comes to Abigail, not to Nabal. Why does the servant come to Abigail?
Because Nabal's a very wicked man. And would
And
have
he is the great grandson of whom? He's a Calebite. The sons of Caleb. He was very wise. They came back with a good report.
Yeah.
So what's going on here? You know, Caleb was wise, discerning, and now his great grandson's a fool.
Yep, very wicked.
So it's really bizarre how this all shakes out. But anyway, the servant is going to Abigail because I think he knows her great powers of influence.
Mhm.
Now, if you've been married to a foolish husband for this long, she obviously knows how to navigate rough waters,
Yeah,
right?
without a doubt.
So she's had to do this before. She's had to clean up the wake of disaster that her husband's left behind so that they're not accursed. I doubt this was the first time she had to humiliate herself to save her husband.
Mhm.
Because it says, and he comes to her, the servant knows who to go to in this household. There isn't any reasoning with Nabal at all. And the servant, does he have a suggestion of what to do? He doesn't have a suggestion, but he just wants to bring it to her attention. So he brings the problem without really presenting a solution. And the next verse I find so powerful. Abigail lost no time.
Right.
She immediately springs into action. She doesn't write a letter to David.
Mhm.
She doesn't, say, "Oh, we'll go to David and tell him to calm down." Or tell him, "How dare you come into my property? You're trespassing, get off." There was a lot of responses that you could have come up with. She didn't do any of that. She lost no time.
I mean, it was the servant's immediate report to her that just clued her in really fast.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, we've been out in the fields all this time. And David's guys, he's been making sure nobody messed with us, stole anything, or killed anything. He's been a wall of protection around us. And she's like, oh my goodness, he's been looking at all my husband's stuff. And now he treats them that way.
Yeah. It's a real slap in the face.
It is.
So, and while she's getting things going and she's sending all the servants ahead of her with all this food,
Mhm.
hoping that that would appease David before she got there to give him the message.
Right.
So he's
Yeah.
witnessing the fruits of her actions literally before she even arrives.
Mhm.
That's a lot of food too.
Was a lot of men there.
It's very smart because she's putting her actions ahead of her words. Actions come before words when you really want to influence.
Jacob and Esau.
That's why when diplomats go overseas and they talk a big talk, but there's no evidence, there's no proof, there's no actions of what you really intend, are they going to be influenced and listen to you?
Yeah, action is.
In Middle Eastern countries and in the Far East.
Yeah.
Like Japan and China and other places, if you're going to do a business deal, do you jump into the deal right away?
Oh, no, you must go through the proper respect and identify yourself, respect our customs, and then we get to when it's time.
And give a gift.
And give a gift, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it is all about knowing and understanding who you're dealing
Yeah.
with. And
Absolutely.
seeing if their actions back up what they say.
Mhm.
So she's very wise in that she does all of this. Meanwhile, David is fuming. The pressure is building.
Yeah.
And he is like, it's been useless. All these years watching over this man's property so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David if I leave one male alive of all who belong to him. So not just kill the man, but kill every male who works for him.
Mm.
Everybody, the sheep shearers, the farmers, the threshers, everybody.
Yeah, everybody you kept alive and kept protected.
Yeah, they realize it, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
So, Can I get a read for this slide? Okay, so this will be the last slide.
All right, is it your turn?
Already, right?
Yeah, my turn. Okay, let's finish this up then. All right. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "My lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now, since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over all Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant."
Absolutely brilliant speech. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address has nothing on this.
For real.
None of the speeches do. It is brilliant. I would start off by saying she separates the man from the sin.
Yeah.
She separates the man from the sin that he's about to commit, rather than coming out saying, "Shame on you, David.
Yeah.
I can't believe you're doing this." Blah, 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 blah. She's not barking like a dog. She is saying, you fight the Lord's battles, not your own. And she's future forecasting. This woman's brilliant. She can see into his future. It's like, when you're king, you will not have on your conscience this staggering blood guilt from doing this. So it shows her astuteness, it shows her wisdom, it shows her discernment. She knows exactly why he's there, to kill her husband and everybody in the house. And instead of shaming him, instead of blaming him, she's saying, look who you really are. Look who God intends for you to be. And I'm so glad I got here in time so that you're not going to, do this thing, because God is going to make you a lasting dynasty because you fight the Lord's battles, not your own. And your enemies, what phraseology does she say about his enemies that would have immediately rung a bell for David? What does she say?
The lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling.
Yes.
Oh, wait a minute.
I
Yeah.
think David would remember that event.
Yes.
So it's an astounding speech. It's brilliant, and she has made all the stuff. So we're gonna stop there
Yeah.
and pick up tomorrow.
One last thing about, it's interesting if you look at this 31st verse and think about it.
Mhm.
She said, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed.
Yeah, I brought that up.
Oh my gosh, in the far future, he will indeed have that problem. When we think of Uriah,
Oh yeah.
the Hittite.
I wish that she'd been around
Yeah,
then.
she gave him such an advice there that I'm sure it went past him, that it's almost like a foreshadowing. I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Anyway.
it is a foreshadowing.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, we'll finish this analysis next time, but we definitely covered how a woman's influence can trump a man's strength and intellect with Solomon and Samson, the two S's. And now we're this wonderful two roads of influence between Abigail and Michal that is just astounding how diverse they are, but they're very comparable. So we'll pick up next week. Thank you for your time, and I'll ask David to close.
Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we humbly bow before Thee to give Thee thanks for the opportunity that we've had this evening to meet together.